One of the things we see is that businesses with equal representation of women and men at the board level and at the executive level perform better financially than other companies in their sectors. So there's certainly a really strong business case. We can see the results of what will happen when we have women at the decision-making table. And it's one of these things that, intuitively women get it. Like when you talk to this about women, they go, yes, of course, it makes complete sense. But we've still got a big proportion of people who don't actually believe that's the case.
We're your co-hosts, Vicky and Laura, and this is the Resilient Entrepreneurs Podcast, the ultimate guide for ambitious business founders and startups. Hear from business heroes who've faced unexpected challenges as we unpack how they slayed their dragon and reignite your instinct to conquer your dragon.
Ros, welcome to the Resilient Entrepreneurs Podcast. Vicky and I are so excited to have you here today to have a really good, juicy conversation about business and entrepreneurship and, of course, a bit of resilience in there, as that's so important to all of us. So let's start with a really big, deep, wide, juicy question. I want to ask you, if I could give you a magic wand right now, what's the one thing you'd really like to see change in your world?
In the world, I think, in general, one of the things that I'm really passionate about and have been working on for a long time now is supporting women in leadership roles. And I read fairly recently that we will have a man on Mars before we achieve equality for women at work, which is really disappointing. And for me, if I had that magic wand, that's something I'd be waving right now, would be we need more women in senior roles, in government, in businesses, at board tables, executive teams, in politics, all of those places. We need more women because as a society, as a global society, we're suffering as a result of not seeing that representation in those very senior levels. The people who make decisions about our lives, about our work, about everything that we do, it's a lot of that is based on predominantly the male model of how things should be in the world. And, it needs to change. It really does need to change. So if I had a magic wand, that would be my magic wand straight up, would be let's just change that. Let's get diversity of thought, diversity of interest, all that sort of thing at the tables where decisions are being made. And I think the world would be a much better place for that.
What a great wish. And thank you for having that wish. I'd love to dig a little deeper into what would change when women are in those important decision-making roles. How would things be different?
Look, I think a really good example would be talking about women, peace and security. And I don't know if you've heard that out of the States, there's, they pulled that basically out of the Department of Defence. I read that just the other day. And I've got a friend of mine who works in women, peace and security. She was the Australian Department of Defence representative to NATO. And she worked out of Washington for a while around that. And she and I have talked a lot about the stats around how when women are involved in the negotiation processes globally, there's more likely to be peace. And when peace happens, it's more likely to be a long-lasting peace. So there's certainly, and we see it in business as well. One of the things we see is that businesses with equal representation of women and men at the board level and at the executive level perform better financially than other companies in their sectors. So there's certainly a really strong business case. We can see the results of what will happen when we have women at the decision-making table. And it's one of these things that, intuitively women get it. Like when you talk to this about women, they go, yes, of course, it makes complete sense. But we've still got a big proportion of people who don't actually believe that's the case. So it's a really interesting one. And, certainly, when you look at what happens when you have women in senior roles, businesses can be very different. I worked with a wonderful, wonderful woman leader for a while who became the managing director of the company she was at, and she completely changed the way she did things for men and for women. She encouraged people to work flexibly, to work from home. She said, if you've got to go home and pick up your kids from school and go to a sports carnival, knock yourself out. I don't mind. I don't care where you are or how you work or what you're doing as long as the work's getting done. And she fundamentally reinvented that organisation. She had women embraced it because that's what women like to do. And men were kind of like, you sure this is okay? Like, I really want to go home at 3. Is that all right? And she's like, go, don't even tell me you're going, just go do it. Whatever you need to do is fine. And, the organisation was happier. It was more engaged. It was more productive. They got better financial results out of the fact that they were allowing people to to be human, to live like human lives. It's not work-life balance, it's work-life integration. It's how do we acknowledge these are both really big parts of us and bring them together so they're not in conflict all the time. And I love that. They designed a whole new office. They got in office consultants to basically look at how people could work more effectively. And so instead of people having desks and cubicles, they had, spaces. So like focus zones and collaboration zones and things like that. And it just, just completely changed the way they did things, and people loved it. They embraced it. It was this sort of sense, like I said, the men weren't used to it. They're like, I don't know, am I allowed to do this? And then they were like, this is great. I get to go home and play soccer with my kids, and then I log on again once they've gone to bed, and I do another couple of hours at night. So everybody loved it, and you sort of look at it and go, there should be more of that in the world.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. And it's so simple, and it's so, I think, a bit of an entrepreneurial kind of mindset. Because I think that's a reason a lot of people leave corporate jobs to become entrepreneurs, is because that's exactly what they need, is that level of flexibility.
Yeah. And I find that, in the work I do with women, one of the things that I do find frustrating, not for me, but, in terms of looking at it and going, what this does to society, is I coach women who are often get to the glass ceiling, and they're looking at the world on the other side of it, and they're going, with the amount of effort that it takes to break the glass ceiling and get to that table, I don't think I want the world that's there. I've looked through the window and I don't want that world. I don't want the stress. I don't want the responsibility. I don't want the long hours. I don't want the expectations. I don't want the toxic behavior that goes with that. And so they come to me for exit coaching to go and do something else. And they go off and become entrepreneurs. They go to become the CEO of a charity or a not-for-profit, which is wonderful for them and wonderful for the new work they're doing. But then the organization, I'm looking at it and going, you're hemorrhaging really amazing female talent because, it's just not structured the way that women want to work.
Yeah, that's really interesting point, because are women getting to the stage of almost at this table and going, yeah, I don't want to be any part of that. It's interesting. So I think a lot of women do. We know statistically, a lot of women do become entrepreneurs later in life, in their 40s and 50s, when they are at that stage where they should be in those high level management positions. It's really interesting. They look at it and they don't like the structure. So what do we do? How do we change the structure? Do we have to build those high level companies ourselves as women entrepreneurs?
I think we do. I've been having this conversation. It sort of started back with a research project I started in 2016, where I reached out to women, through LinkedIn, and it just grew. And I ended up with 538 women from around the world who contributed interviews, focus groups, surveys, a whole, basically around what's it like for women in leadership? What's the world like for you? How do you work when you're at your best? What are some of the things that come out for you when you're under challenge and things like that? And from that, I developed a model and an assessment tool, and we've now had over 10,000 women from 93 countries go through the assessment, which is great. But what we're coming back to is this thing of that women talk about, when I interviewed some of these women, so women who own their own businesses have designed them completely differently. They designed them from the ground up to be family friendly. Like I spoke to a woman who owns an allied health business, and she said, I designed it to be female friendly. And she said, interestingly, we don't exclude men, but they come to be interviewed, and then they kind of get to the point where we're talking about, would you like the job? And they're like, oh, I don't know that this is really going to work for me. And she said, everyone who works there is part-time. They've all got families. And she said, the lovely thing about it is that if somebody's child gets sick, everybody immediately jumps into action and reshuffles all that person's patients, so that, everybody sort of takes an extra person on that day, so that, the person with the sick child can just go home and not worry about it. But she said, there's no sense that you now owe me something because I helped you out. It's just what we do. And she said, I don't feel like I'm the boss. She said, I'm certainly, the buck stops with me as the business owner. But she said, I feel like I'm a collaborator in this amazing team where everyone gets a say in how we do things. And she said, we're very collaborative. We talk about everything that we do. When I talk about business strategy, we're all involved. And she said, it's this beautiful collective of women who are supporting each other. She says, it's like a sisterhood rather than a business. And in a lot of ways, I look at that and go, that sounds amazing. But the fact that repels men is interesting. So there's a middle ground in here somewhere where we go, let's look at what men like to do and what women like to do. And can we create organizations that embrace and value both and have the structures that work for both? And, it's just been a really interesting evolution to sort of, talk to women, in male dominated businesses, in female dominated businesses, in their own businesses, and just see how different it is when women are kind of left alone to set up their own structure. It's like there's no hierarchy. It's a Venn diagram rather than a, sort of pyramid structure that we tend to see. So again, the world, it's like, how do we find the world where both of these things matter and both of these things connect?
You've touched on so much in that. And I even want to go back to something you originally said, but maybe I will later. What you're describing here about working together, the Venn diagram versus the hierarchy, that to me describes great leadership. I should ask you, how do you define leadership? Because I feel like you've just described what my view of leadership is, which is to get to be the person that helps smooth the way for everyone to be their greatest. Would you elaborate on that?
Look, that's one of the really great things that came out of this research that I did was this, women describing to me what great leadership looked like to them. And out of that, we did develop a model that kind of goes, this is what great leadership looks like. And it is this space where, you own your own strength and your own power. You're very empowered and you support and grow other people. When we talk about power to women, power for women is usually power for the good of the collective. It's like I hold power, but I do that because it's for the collective good. There isn't this sense that I hold power because it makes me feel good and I need to be the boss and I need to have drive a particular car and live in a particular suburb. It's I hold my power because it's for the good of the collective. So it very much is this global focus. And that comes from part of what sort of got me really interested was when I kind of went, I want to go back and look at how we used to do leadership before we created work, before we created, the Industrial Revolution and people going to work. And again, going back to that and looking at what happened in tribes and in villages and in systems before the Industrial Revolution. And women were involved. They were working, but they were very involved in, they were always surrounded by support networks. They were caring for children. They were caring for old people. There was this sort of, like it takes a village to raise a child kind of arrangement. And that's what still flows through in women's leadership today, that sort of sense of the good of the collective. We do this, we support, we grow, we nurture, we create space where other people can be successful. There's no sense of, I need to keep you down because I still need to be the best. It's if somebody outgrows me, that's amazing. I love to see them flourish and watch them go on to have these incredible careers and know that I was part of their cheer squad. So it's a very empowering, very freeing type of leadership. When you sort of talk to women about what does it look like if you could just do this your own way, what would that look like for you? And part of this sort of going back to looking at what happened in the past was the fact that men and women did have very different roles and they had different leadership roles for different reasons. And those two forms of leadership were both equally valued. They were just different. So men, and even if you look at, I started looking at what First Nations tribes do today, and you still get that sense of that. There's this sense that men lead everything that happens outside of the village and women lead everything that happens inside of the village. So men are out there, they hunt, they negotiate, they maybe fight with other tribes, but the women are the ones who are there with the village going, now's the time. We know from what we see in our natural environment that it's now time to pack up and move to our winter village, or it's now time to move somewhere. We need to deal with something that's happening inside the village, and they deal with it with the women. And again, it's this sense that all through history we've had these structures where men and women have led differently for different reasons in different ways with different styles. And since the Industrial Revolution, we've stopped valuing the female style of leadership and gone, it's all about the men. And the reason is because when the Industrial Revolution happened, women weren't there. The men were the ones who went to work. Women did, but until the time when they were kind of, married, and then they were expected to stay home and look after children. So the structure was developed without the input of women. And that's what we've got today is structures that were designed by men for men. And it works for them.
Hey there, sorry for the interruption, but if you're a woman entrepreneur ready to raise your profile, expand your reach, and start being seen as the expert you already are, we have a challenge for you. Vicky and I have created a free guide called the LinkedIn to Latte Method. Check it out in the link below. It's designed especially for women who are done playing small and are ready to attract opportunities, clients, and increase your visibility. No tech overwhelm, no awkward call DMs, just clear, authentic strategy that works. So download the free LinkedIn to Latte guide below, take the challenge, and start turning your brilliance into real opportunities. Now, back to the episode.
It's interesting how we can learn from history. And then we can decide what parts of that do we want to bring into the now and into the future. And I love how you've shared, Ros, that the roles were equal historically. They were both valued equally, although they were doing different things. And I think that's an important point to focus on, because there's no blaming, there's no better than, it's just different. And you used the word integration before when you were talking about work-life balance. It's actually work-life integration. And it does make me kind of leap. My mind leaps to, well, how do we integrate these two very different roles? So historically it was that, and then it was the Industrial Revolution. The men were working, the women were at home. Perhaps that's where the integration separated. Perhaps where it was the synergy wasn't as noticed? Or is it that women are now in the workforce and we've created this? I'm not going to say women don't belong in the workforce. Of course, we're founding and leading fantastic, incredible businesses that are making an impact in the world. Yet, where did it break? If it broke at all?
Yeah, and look, women in the workforce in great numbers has only been in the last couple of generations, really. I mean, it happened in World War II, but when I started in the public service back in the late 1980s, I think it was, would have been 86, 87, I spoke to a woman who was probably the age I am now. She was late 50s, and I asked her how long she'd been in the public service, and she said it was the second time round, because the first time round she had to resign when she got married. So this was like, my mother's generation, who had to resign from work when they got married because they weren't allowed to have what was called a man's job. Before marriage, they were tolerated in terms of you could be a secretary or a typist or something like that. But once you got married, you're expected to leave. And even when, I'm 57, and when I had my kids, it was still then, as a public servant, relatively rare for women to come back to work after kids. It was kind of accepted that if you got pregnant and had kids, it's probably the last we'd see of you. So women sticking around in the workplace is a relatively modern thing for a lot of women. And it's this sense, again, like I said, the structure just isn't there to support women. The structure is designed for somebody who has somebody else at home supporting them. And I remember I ran a women's leadership program, and I invited in one of the departmental secretaries to come and speak. It was a government program to the women. And one of the questions he was asked by one of the women is, look, you've had a successful career. What did it take? Like, what advice would you give us as middle-level female managers in your government department? What advice would you give us? And he said, get a wife. I've got one there, awesome. But that was his response. He thought about it for a while, and he went, no, seriously. He said, my wife has been in the background. She manages the house. She books our holidays. She organises medical appointments. She tells me when to go to the dentist. She dry cleans my clothes. And he said, I've been able to focus on my career, and that's why I've had the success that I've had, because I've had somebody else do everything else for me, my life admin, basically. And then I talked to a woman who'd recently retired and moved back to Hobart. She'd been working in Singapore and Hong Kong all of her working life. And she never married she's basically said to me, I made the choice to put my career first. But she said the same thing. She said that she had what in the country she was working in is called an auntie, which is an older housekeeper who live-in housekeeper. And she said, I couldn't have done it without my auntie, because she basically, same thing, made sure I had clothes, cooked food for me, did my washing, did my housework, did all my life admin. And she said that was what freed me up to have this amazing career, was the fact that I had somebody at home doing this stuff for me. And you look at that and go, there's only a certain percentage, and it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller in the modern world, of people who've got that luxury of having somebody who's staying at home, basically administering their life. And whether that's male or female is fairly irrelevant. It's just that luxury of having somebody in the background who does everything for you. And then you look at that and go, how have we ended up with this system where you've got work takes up so much of somebody, that the only way to be really successful is to have somebody else do everything else in your life? And it's like, don't you miss that? I mean, are you sort of going, work is so important that I don't care that I never see my kids? Work is so important that if I didn't have somebody telling me to go to the dentist, that all my teeth would have fallen out by now. It's a bit like that, and like I talk to men who, men in very high powered leadership roles who are like, yeah, exactly that. I haven't seen my kids, It's like I'm taking my family to Africa on a safari because we haven't been away as a family for the last 2 years, and I don't think my children know my name anymore.
And Ros, wait till the AI agents start taking on those life admin roles, which is literally around the corner. probably before the end of this year. And then what? Is our AI going to arrange for the Uber to get our kids to school?
Probably. But then you look at that and go that you're missing out on so much in the life of your family and your friends and just life outside of work. Like I said, it's the integration. There's more to life than just work. And I think it's really sad that we've created a system where the only way to be successful, I mean, I'm not saying this is the only way, but the traditional way to be successful is to give up everything else in order to do that. And it's not healthy for humans. It's not the way to live.
No, it's too much of a sacrifice. It's way too much of a sacrifice. And it's hard. I mean, I know as an entrepreneur and a single mom, and I'm trying to, do all the things. The best advice I ever got is like, you have to understand the difference between a rubber ball and a glass ball.
Exactly.
They're all up in the air. And sometimes you have to let the rubber balls bounce and just not catch them. And it's okay. There's some things you can miss or you can say no to or you cannot be part of, but you got to just chase the glass balls and try not to drop them. And it's hard. And it's really hard. And I'm here hoping that AI agents are going to help us to be able to manage some of those rubber balls so that we can just focus on the important things and be there. But it's that elusive balance. We talk about it so often. We've definitely had many conversations on this podcast about balance and finding balance and all the opinions around, is it even real? Is it possible? It's always an interesting conversation. And I think it's interesting. I love what you're saying about structures and how we've created these systems that have made it, so difficult because we've separated so much from the tribe.
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of it. We leave our parents' homes and we don't go back. And we leave the spaces where our friends are and we go to the city or we go to chase this something and we leave the support structure we once had. Whereas when you can have those people around you, have grandparents in the home helping with the grandkids while the parents are working, things like that can really make a big difference. And I think it's going to be the ongoing challenge for a very long time. And I hope, like you, that we see a brighter future for women, that we can have some sort of great world where we can balance. But I love the women building businesses that take this into consideration.
Yes.
That's the difference, isn't it?
Yeah. And I love that for women who are doing that, deliberately. Like there's another woman that I spoke to who was, I did an interview with her and she was phenomenal. I mean, she was in the States and she has created a collective of women who are now the largest supplier of live cockroaches to the reptile industry. And zoos, animal parks, people who keep lizards as pets, they eat cockroaches apparently. I didn't know that, but there you go. And she said to me that she started off as she was a single mum. She was struggling and she got into, I can't remember the story of how she got into it, but she started growing cockroaches in her garage. And she had me on FaceTime on the phone and she kind of took me out to the garage and she lifted the lid of this cockroach thing and just dunked the phone in it. And I got this extreme close up of cockroaches. But anyway, and I was kind of like, ugh. But so she started doing this in her garage, and then as she became more known and people started ordering more cockroaches, she outgrew her ability to produce. And rather than going, now I need to become the CEO of my own empire and I need to buy a warehouse and train all these people and grow cockroaches and create this mega empire of cockroach growing, she reached out to other women she knew in similar situations to where she'd been, and she set them up with cockroach kits. So you just need some plastic, the plastic tubs with lids so they can't get out. And she'd send them cockroaches in a matchbox and you just put them in the tub and feed them and water and they just do their thing. And so now she's got this network right around the United States of women who are producing cockroaches. And when an order comes in, she'll just send it to the person who's closest to where that order is. Because the other thing about it is shipping cockroaches when they're alive, you want to get them there as quickly as possible. So if they're being ordered in New York, you want it shipped from New York, not shipped from, San Francisco.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And so but I love the fact that she kind of went, rather than me creating my own empire, why don't I just help other women? It's that collective good thing that came out again. And that was really the theme that ran through a lot of these interviews, was this women doing this for the collective good. And I love that,
Yeah.
I'm still recovering.
Me too.
I'm trying to keep focused on the point of the story, but you didn't know this before, but now you do. It's cockroaches are a phobia that I haven't yet worked through. So
yes,
the visuals are going nuts right now. Thanks for that. I'm sure that we have listeners who are experiencing something similar.
I probably should put it. We probably need a warning on the front.
I think we will. Thank you very much.
Trigger warning.
Yeah, trigger warning. If you're scared of cockroaches, don't listen to this one. It was a lot.
Story.
It was a lot. The cockroaches in my face. But yeah, it was just such a lovely story, and the fact that she developed this amazing collaborative connection, with all of these women, and this amazing network. And look, at the time I talked to her, they were about to start making a documentary on what she'd done. One of the US television stations was going to make a documentary on it, and I never circled back to her to find out where that went. But it was just that, again, women doing amazing things for other women. It's that sense that when women are successful, and not all women, just like not all men, to be really clear, but when women are successful, they tend to go, how can I lift other women? It's like the rising tide lifts all boats, rather than I'm going to be really uber successful and I really don't care about the rest of the women in my world. You can just, suffer with it. And I really love that about it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's a theme that I've noticed in the entrepreneurial world. You can call anyone who's in business for themselves a founder. And it doesn't matter what their business is or how successful they've been. As long as you can get to the person, I guarantee that they will help you where they can. If you have a question that they know they can support you with, I just feel there's this camaraderie in the entrepreneurial world where we just want to make sure that others who are working towards creating greatness and creating impact get what they need.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And you certainly see that. It's been my experience of women, entrepreneurs in the networks that I'm in, is that everybody is always really happy to lend advice, to have a chat, to support you, to, sometimes even you have a very brief chat with someone, and after a bit, you've talked for a couple of minutes, and the first thing she'll say to you is, how can I support you? How do I help you with this? I've got clients I can send your way. I love what you do. Let me send people to you. So it's a very supportive space.
Yeah. Such a great conversation. It's such an important one to have. Thank you for bringing this. I think I've never asked a better question at the start of a podcast before to set us off on this great path. I do also want to mention that you've written a book,
Yes.
The Resilient Employee. Tell us a little bit about the book and what inspired you to write that.
So that was, that came off the back of me running a number of programs around change. So I've got a suite of 3 programs. There's Thriving in Change for people inside organisations, employees. There's Leading Change for managers, and then there's Leading Authentically in Times of Change for senior executive level. And in running those programs, I found that people were giving me the most incredible unsolicited feedback. Like, I was getting emails after the session from people going, that was incredible. I had no idea that was what I was going to get out of it. And so the book came from this thought about, how can I get that message to more people? Because obviously I'm limited by the number of sessions that I can run, for example, whereas if I write a book, it's in the hands of lots of people around the world. And so that was the inspiration for it. So it came off taking the program and going, how do I turn this into a book that I can get out to as many people as possible? So that was really the space that it came from. Look, writing a book it's not an easy thing. It's one of those things where it takes a lot of energy and a lot of time to sort of pull something together. And I certainly had a great team of people. I engaged editors and, cover designers and a book coach to sort of help me with everything, and an amazing woman who actually did all the techie stuff. So, it just magically appeared on Amazon one day. It was great, But, so that was really the idea behind it, was how do I get this information to as many people as possible, because it's obviously resonating so beautifully for the people that were going through the program.
And you were talking about resilience. In the book, and you have your own personal story of resilience. If you care to share it, then I'm sure our audience would be grateful to know of your journey as well. And then my question is how resilience factors into success.
Yeah. So look, I'll start with the story. So, obviously, as with everybody, there's, lots of ups and downs in people's lives. There's lots of points where we lean into our resilience and, work our way through something. But this for me was, I suppose the big point for me was my cancer journey. So I was diagnosed with cancer back in 2010. It was breast cancer. And at the time I was a busy, senior manager. I was working hard. I was traveling a lot for work. My husband was amazing. He was the one who was, in the trenches doing the support stuff and working as well. And, I was very stressed. There was a lot going on at work, a lot of change. There was a lot of things happening. And right in the middle of it, I went for a mammogram. The reason I was going for mammograms actually starting in my 30s, because my mum died from breast cancer in 2005, and she'd had a couple of rounds of it going back years. And so I was getting tested really regularly. So I went for my annual mammogram and didn't really think much of it. And then I got a call and they said, we just need you to come back in. There's a couple of things that we need to just sort of clarify, And look, she said to me, most people who come back a second time, there's nothing. Don't panic or anything like that. We just need you to come back in. And so I went back in and they put you through a series of tests, and you sort of turn up at the beginning of the day and there's 15 other women in the waiting room. And then as they all get cleared, they go home. And so, the number dwindles down, and we get to about 4:00 in the afternoon, and there's only me and one other woman still in the room. And then the doctor asked to see me, and I went into his office and he said, I'm so sorry, you have cancer, which is one of probably the hardest phrases that you'll hear. I think probably the harder one than that would be, your child has cancer. But, so there I was, and, it was all the medical stuff I won't go into because it's, it's pretty yucky, but it's a really big deal in someone's life, because the first thing that you think is, that's it, I'm going to die. That's the first thing I thought, is that's it, because I'd seen my mother die from breast cancer. And so it was, that's it. And I thought maybe last Christmas was the last Christmas I'm going to have had with my children. And I didn't know that. And the whole medical stuff is all much of a blur, really. Kind of just, get through it and you go through it, and there's a lot of stuff that happens. But I went through all of these regrets around, I wish I'd done all these things that I haven't done. If this is it, if I've got 6 months or a year, all the things I hadn't done that I sort of go, oh God, I should have done this. Could have done this, could have done that I didn't do. And that was really confronting, to kind of go, when you think you've got years and years and years left to do all the things you want to do, to kind of go, if I've only got 6 months, I'm never going to be able to do all of these things. And the other thing that was really interesting for me was the fact that for the first time in my life, I couldn't do anything, because a lot of my self-worth was attached to my ability to do things. I was smart, I was capable, I had a senior role, I was caught up in the delivery loop, do more, be more, achieve more, be more valuable, prove yourself through adding value to everything. And for the first time, I couldn't actually do anything except lie on the couch and recover, and so it was that sort of space of, I didn't know who I was. It's like you took work away from me and I had no idea who I was anymore. And that was, again, something that I had to work through is, what does this look like for me? Like if I do get better, what does this look like? What am I going to do with the rest of my life? Because I'd suddenly lost interest in, climbing the corporate ladder, which had been the previous sort of, what's the next rung? What's the next promotion? How do I go about, positioning myself for the next big thing? And I found that through that experience, that completely changed for me. I went, actually, that was rubbish. Like, why did I even want that? It was separating me from my kids. It was damaging my relationship with my husband. I was worn out. I was stressed. I was exhausted. I was burnt out. And, so I had that sort of 6 months of treatment to really kind of go, what did I really want to do? And one of the things was travel, so we'd always wanted to travel and we just hadn't gotten around to it because the kids are too young, the kids are too old, the kids are at the wrong stage in school, all that kind of stuff. And I said to my husband, if I get through this, the first thing we're going to do is start traveling again. Actually travel somewhere. And so we did. And the other thing about it was, I didn't know then I wanted to start a business, but I knew I wanted to do something else. It wasn't, the corporate life anymore. And for me, it then turned into, the work that I was doing inside a business, the value I was adding there, I kind of went, there's got to be a way I can bring this to more people. How can I help more people? How can I support more people to do this stuff? And that was where then it became really obvious that a business was the way to go. I needed to sort of strike out on my own and do my own thing. And I think the resilience piece for me was, and it goes back a long way for me because I had my grandfather as a resilient role model for me. So he was a Spitfire pilot during World War II, and he was shot down and he lost his leg in the Battle of Britain. And his story is quite incredible. Like, he was shot down, bailed out of the aeroplane, realised he'd lost his leg, used his radio cord as a tourniquet to stop the bleeding while he was parachuting down, landed in a field, and this kid ran up with a pitchfork and tried to stab him with a pitchfork because he thought he was German, It ran away. My grandfather crawled to the side of the road, flagged down a passing car, went to hospital, had his leg taken off. And his first words when he came out of surgery, his first thing he asked was, when can I play rugby again? And he went on to have an amazing life. He was an advisor to Winston Churchill during the war. So he was Churchill's advisor on Air Force matters during the war because he was, couldn't fly again. He did end up going back to flying, and he was a test pilot for the first jet-powered aircraft, the Comets, and got a medal for some stuff he did around that. I won't go into a lot of detail, but he just lived this amazing, incredibly resilient life. Like when I was a kid growing up, I never thought about him as being disabled because he just did everything everybody else did, He swam, he skied, he did all kinds of stuff. He just lived a completely full life without any sense of him being disabled. And it would have been really easy for somebody in that sort of situation to kind of sit back and go, my life is over. I'm just going to, put up and suffer with it for the rest of the time. And that, I think, really helped me in my battle was the fact that I'd had that role model who just got on with it. He never complained about it. He used to take his artificial leg off after lunch and just rest his stump for a bit because he used to get a bit sore in the afternoon. So he'd take his leg off. And that was the only time he ever used to sort of go, oh, that's right, Pops has only got one leg, He really was. He was amazing. Yeah, because I saw somebody with something that could have been, could have changed his whole life, if he'd let it. And he didn't. He just went, this is who I am. He just moved on, and he became a diplomat. He was a British air attaché after the war. And he and my grandmother lived in, lots of different countries. I can't remember how many, a lot, as diplomats. And then moved to Australia after their last posting, because the second last was actually to Canberra, and then they went to Rhodesia, as it was in those days, and then they decided to retire in Canberra. So that's how my family ended up in Australia. But just that sort of always having somebody in my life who was like, no matter what life throws at you, you just make the best you possibly can of it. You just get on, you do what you can. And after he retired, he became a public speaker, and again, an amazing career from somebody who had every reason in the world to go, life's really unfair. He told me once that everyone in his squadron was killed. And he said to me, I'm really lucky I was shot down at the beginning of the Battle of Britain. He was shot down in the first couple of days. He said, because everybody else in my squadron died. Wow. He was a wing commander back in those days. And he said, they all died. And he said, if I hadn't been shot down, I would have been dead too. So it's sort of putting that, being able to see that, see the good in it.
It's a great thing to carry into life and business, to, look for what's working for you versus what went wrong. And so you carried that through your cancer journey too, by the sound of it.
That was the really big thing for me, is I quite often used to think, what would Pop do? I was having those moments of, this really so unfair, why me, as you do, why me, this is awful, when I was sort of sitting there going, another operation, it's just like, okay, and what would Pop do? Pop would get up and show up, because that's what he used to do, and that's what I did. Not perfectly, by any means.
It sounds like a decision. It sounds like a decision to just be resilient. And I never thought of resilience as like a decision. I feel like it's always been something you have to become or be, but it can just be that decision. I'm deciding right now to be resilient in this moment and get through and make the best.
Resilience research, does show things in common. And when I run programs, I ask people, reflect on someone who's really resilient. Let's see if we can pull out the key traits that they have. And it always comes down to things like, people are very confident in their own ability, which is that I know that I can get through this. So it's that sense of, usually resilient people have been through something fairly big, and they've kind of gone, I went through that, so everything else is a cakewalk after that. There is adaptability, that kind of like life throws you curveballs, and you need to kind of be able to tear up the plan and just do a new one, because it doesn't go to plan all the time. Social support is a huge thing. People have got social networks around them who can support them. And there really is this sort of sense of, that adaptability, strength, confidence, being able to go, you know what, I can figure this out. I'm a good problem solver. And the other thing is a really strong sense of purpose is important too, I've found. People have got purpose.
I love that one. We help our entrepreneur community with that one a lot, because when we feel overwhelmed or lost, or like things are sliding backwards instead of progressing, it's like when you focus back on the why, what your purpose is, why you're doing this in the first place, why it's important to you, why you give a damn, then all of a sudden that overwhelm and the despair can dissolve, because you reconnect with the why.
Yeah,
Yeah.
couldn't agree more. And look, we saw that in Viktor Frankl's work, The Man's Search for Meaning, where he talks about that in the concentration camps during World War II, that he said the people who survived the camps were the ones with purpose. They talked about, when I get out of here, I'm going to find my family. When I get out of here, I'm going to emigrate to America. When I get out of here, I'm going to go back to my hometown. I'm going to build my shop again. Whatever it was, they had something that they were looking forward to on the other side of the hellhole they were in. And he said that was the key. That was what he really distilled out of all the experiences in the camps. That was the one thing that he said kept people alive.
Yeah, because back to Laura's word of choice or decision, we can choose to believe the stories that we're telling ourselves in the moment of despair, and get caught up in the whirlwind that sucks us down into feeling sorry for ourselves, or feeling like a failure, or whatever the belief system's driving. All of that's just fear-based, by the way. Like, all of those feelings, not to dismiss them because they're real and they're valid, yet they're all fear-based. So if we can address the fear, we can help ourselves through that. But the other option is to make the decision or take the choice to connect with that part of you, like you said, that has something to look forward to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And look, when I was going through treatment, gratitude has a lot to do with it as well. Like, I remember I used to go for radiation every day at the hospital, and I'd walk in under my own steam and I'd walk out under my own steam. And I would see people being wheeled down on trolleys, who couldn't move. And for me, I'd look around the waiting room, waiting to go in for my radiation. And every time when I looked around the room, I was probably the healthiest person there. Everyone else was in a wheelchair or on a trolley, and I'd walk there, and I made a habit of parking, about 15 minutes from the hospital and walking there, and then walking back to my car every time. And I actually tried a little experiment to see how many different ways I could walk to the hospital. And I found 17 different ways to walk to the hospital, alleyways and through shops and things like that. But it was that gratitude thing. Like, I kept looking at that and going, wow, I'm actually not that bad off, And like, I remember talking to a guy who was a farmer, and he was in his 80s, and he was there for prostate cancer. And he told me, he said, I'm not going home from hospital. This is just prolonging my life. And I looked at that and went, I'm just so much better off than so many people. I mean, yeah, this is, it's not much fun, but it could be so much worse than what it is.
Yeah.
And there's a real element of gratitude in that every day. There was for me.
And now you're here helping other people, helping other entrepreneurs, helping other women to create these beautiful spaces where we truly can be resilient, where we can create, I think, the systems that are going to change the way we work and will make it better for people with families, so that we can find some levels of balance and health and happiness and joy, back in the world. I think we do need a change. It is time for that revolution. It is time for the women to take their place back as leaders, because we once were, like you said. I love the history lesson too that you shared. It is important to remember that, what it was like in a tribe and what that felt like to work together, to collaborate, to build spaces, and to be creative as that woman with her cockroach business. That's so creative and incredible. We can create whatever we want. The point is, we can create whatever we want. You can create whatever type of business you want, whatever type of structure you want. What works for you is likely going to work for other people like you. So let's build those things. Let's build those spaces. Let's build those businesses. Let's create the things that we want to see in the world. And that's where the real change comes from. When we take over as not being consumers, but turning into creators. How do we build? How do we grow? I love that. And I love this conversation. It started off with a bang. It went gorgeous and deep. And I just want to let you know, Ros, I really appreciate you coming here and being so vulnerable and telling us your story and sharing all your wisdom. It's been an amazing time. Thank you for joining us.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.